Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, continuing our deep dive into this Michigan program, heading into spring practice, fall camp, the 2024 season. And last week we took a look at the Michigan offensive line. This week we take a look at a Michigan defensive line that was one of, if not the best units in the country in 2023. And I think a lot of opposing college football fans see guys like Chris Jenkins, Jalen Harrell, Braden McGregor go to the NFL and hoping that Michigan takes a step back on the defensive line in 2024. But you take a look at some of the talent that is running it back in 2024. This is going to be one of the better defensive lines that you see in the country in 2024. Want to do two things. One, talk about what made this Michigan defensive line so special in 2023, and then take a look at this 2024 season and kind of talk about how this defensive line in the rotation will shake out in that 2024 year. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys, and a special shout out as always to the Michigan fans. Many of you guys know the boys are massive Michigan fans. Nothing more we like talking about than Michigan football. Cannot thank you guys enough for all the support you guys have shown the boys for the last 6 months. Obviously, a magical season in 2023, coaching search that's going on now. You guys have shown a ton of support. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And more importantly, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. We'll drop this question, Dill. Who leads Michigan in sacks in 2024? We'll talk about that later on. But Dill, I'm going to give you the T-box here. Michigan's defensive line in 2023, after going back and looking at the numbers and looking at some of the film, what made that unit so special last year in 2023?
I mean, honestly, to me, it was just the fact that everybody could shed blocks. They made a ton of tackles, and they just, when you make that many from that defensive line, I think you really stifle rushing attacks, and then they just could kind of swarm as a group. I mean, not like elite pass rushers on the edge, but as a unit just worked really, really well. But I think at the end of the day, it all starts from the fact that it's so hard to run on them because all of them can get off blocks. They're all good athletes. They don't get moved around a lot. And that's tackles and that's edges. That's everyone.
After going back, and I mean, the amount of Michigan football that I've watched in the last month, I probably watched the Washington game probably 10 times, the Alabama game probably pressing on 25 times the last month. The one thing that continues to come up, and I'll push back on the edge rusher conversation in a little bit, but the one thing that comes to my mind when I watch this defensive line is, one, how well they're coached. Like, you have to give a massive shout out to not only Jesse Minter, but Mike Alston as well. This is a defensive line that we do previews for a lot of other defensive fronts, and the poor discipline, the bad run fits. I mean, it's kind of littered for a bunch of college football programs. You don't see that with this Michigan defensive line. They sit in their gaps, and you said it best. They use their hands and shed blocks at an exceptional level. And when you have that, and you're able to stifle the run like they did, only allowing 3 yards per carry, top 10 mark in the country, it makes it a lot easier to call a defense when you're winning on first and second down, forcing those third and longs. And when they got into third and long, I mean, those stunts were absolutely nasty for Michigan. And when you have the athleticism you have on the inside with guys like Chris Jenkins last year, Mason Graham, Kenny Grant coming back, those stunts are extremely effective. You saw it pretty much win Michigan the game against Alabama. I mean, it was just one of the more disciplined units, one of the more talented units. And overall, I think it was the best unit in college football in 2023.
And you talk about how they rush the passer. I mean, they do it as a 4-man unit, and they do it really effectively again. And I'm not like taking shots necessarily. I don't think when you don't say, like, the Michigan edge rushers who are going into the draft this year are not going to be day 2 picks probably at this point, but they're great at what you think they are.
I think Braden McGregor and Jalen Harrell are criminally underrated nationally. I mean, those are
100% they're underrated, but they're not like the Dallas Turners of the world. I mean, they're not a lot to. They're not elite pass rushers, but again, they're really physical. They're really strong, and as a unit, that unit rushes the passer as well as anyone. I mean, you saw how much confusion and havoc they were able to create for the Alabama team. That's what they were pretty much doing all year, and that's what is the like special sauce, I feel like, in this Michigan defensive line. And I will say the defensive tackles, like, they're big time, though. Those might be 2 first-round picks, but the way they work as a team, I don't think anyone does it.
And that's, I mean, look, we had the discussion on Monday night around who should Michigan go after as their next defensive coordinator. I mean, that is probably an argument, and you kind of were going more to a recruiting guy. I was kind of more on the let's go back to the Ravens tree and NFL kind of style. I think that kind of supports going back to the NFL. Like, this was a very complex defense. You saw multiple different fronts. You saw 3-man fronts, 5-man fronts. The amount of confusion and the complexity that this Michigan defense, specifically on that defensive line, gave to opposing offensive lines, I think is a really good argument to say, hey, we want to keep this defensive scheme in place because it absolutely was wreaking havoc for opposing offensive lines. Now, Dill, I want to start with the interior defensive line because you were looking at, and I think probably the best duo of interior defensive linemen in the country in 2024. And for all kind of I wouldn't say haters, but the fans that are hoping Michigan takes a step back. I mean, they're going to be pissed when they found out Mason Graham and Kenny Grant are coming back and only going into year 3 because you're looking at two guys that are not only extremely solid, but extremely disruptive up front.
I mean, Mason Graham, I think very much has an argument for being one of the best defensive tackles last year in the whole game. And I think he's probably further along than Kenny Grant in terms of development and how consistent he is. I mean, you just don't really see any bad reps from him. Kenny Grant obviously came on at the end of the year and really started to dominate in the way he can and might even have a slightly higher ceiling than Mason Graham just because of the pure size and the athleticism.
Can't teach that size.
But like Mason Graham, I just like – he's almost just perfect. He just plays perfect football. He maxes everything out from what he's gotten as talent. I'll
tell you, I mean, you're kind of at a lot. Mason Graham making you lose your words a little bit, which is understandable. Now, Mason Graham, what I think makes him so special is that he checks both boxes. Like you see some guys that are kind of those run stuffers, but can't really offer much in the pass rush. And then you see the guys that on the inside are elite pass rushers, can get penetration, but can't really hold their gaps in the run game. Mason Graham does both. And this was a guy that had 22 run stops last year and average depth of tackle of 1 yard down the field. So what does that tell you in the run game? He is stacking blocks, shedding blocks, and making his plays at or behind the line of scrimmage extremely good laterally. So he's a guy that's making a lot of plays from that inside of the defensive line. And then you take a look at what he does in the pass rush, a 16.4% pass rush win rate in the last month. I've looked at a lot of interior defensive linemen and a lot of pass rush win rates. That's one of the highest that you'll see, 18 quarterback hurries. The way that he can challenge interior defensive lineman with his quickness off the ball, and then combine that with the wrestling background he has with how he uses his hands and keeps kind of the offensive lineman off his frame. And again, you're looking at not only freaky athlete, but an extremely polished interior defensive lineman. I think that's why you saw one of the best defensive linemen in the season, or I should say in college football in 2023. And then, Dill, you talk about Kenny Grant. It is the combination of size and athleticism that you just kind of say, God don't make many of those kind of guys.
And when he was playing with like good leverage at the end of the year and using his hands better, I think like, again, the only kind of moments you saw where maybe you left a little bit to be desired was getting moved around a little bit when he'd play a little high and on double teams. You think back to some of the earlier games, but by the end, he was really dominating and you really started to see what those two as pass rushers together. And it all kind of culminated in that Washington game where they were so dominant in that Joe Moore award-winning line. Everyone, how's Michigan going to deal with that team? I mean, they just were so much physically better than them. Nobody could block Kenny Grant one-on-one. He was running through guys. He's using his hands, just being as dominant as he could be. And when he's playing really good, because Mason Graham's level kind of stays at where it is all the time, he's always dominant. I just don't really see what you do with this defense.
Kenny Grant's a guy that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I am extremely excited about Mason Graham heading into 2024. Kenny Grant might be the guy I'm most excited for because I think there's still a lot of meat left on the bone. Now, I'm not saying Mason Graham is capped out by any means, but Kenny Grant's a guy that you really take a look at the trajectory of him as a player. You see the traits. It takes just 1 second to look at this dude and say, yeah, he's different. And then if he continues to kind of learn how to use his hands and play with low pads, better leverage, I mean, that is a guy that I think could take a massive step. And again, that was year 2 at the college football level. It's rare to see guys come in along the line of scrimmage and dominate like you saw those two guys do. Year 3, I think, is when you see those guys take another step. And if Mason Graham and Kenny Grant take another step, you're looking at an absolute force. And Bill, I think the one question you have really with this defensive line as a whole, now specifically the inside, you lose a guy like Chris Jenkins, you lose a guy like Cam Good. What does the depth look like behind those big bodies? A guy like Rayshon Bennett, I think he took a massive step in year
Rayshon
3
Penny
for
was so
Michigan.
good this year.
And you want to see him. He's phenomenal against the run. I mean, had a bunch, 15 run stops and averaged up the tackle of 1.5 yards. Guy that probably you want to see a little bit more pass rush juice from. But, I mean, you talk about a third, kind of like that rotational guy on the inside. I mean, Rayshon Penny is a guy that's starting on a lot of defensive lines across the country. He's our third guy on this group.
Yeah, and then, frankly, what I want to see probably with that, like, what you want to see is that 2-man unit that they were able to run last year where they went 2-2. I want to see Etta get paired up with Rayshon Penny because I think they probably complement each other. And again, we don't really know what Etta is going to be. Yep. I think you saw a couple games. That UNLV game strikes me. Like, you see how, I mean, he's just a different level athlete than kind of Michigan's been recruiting in that middle, which is not necessarily a bad thing because you want to probably broaden out the skill sets. You want some pass rushers behind Kenny Grant and Mason Graham. And I think Etta, the way he uses hands, the quickness, that type of thing, should be able to be an effective pass rush duo, probably with Rayshon Penny as that second line. And that's what I want to see. Again, you don't really know who's going to be that next D tackle, obviously. I have a feeling it's going to be Etta, but who knows? It could be a guy like Trey Pierce. It's hard to say, but
that's what your biggest concern. I mean, you're the starting interior guys, and Mason Graham and Kenny Grant are, again, I think the best unit in the country. I think the question about this Michigan defensive line in terms of can it be kind of that same level you saw in 2023, and partially what made that unit so good is it was incredibly deep. Like, who is going to be our depth this year? And kind of the same conversation we had with the Michigan offensive line last week. You didn't see Michigan go heavy in the transfer portal to add guys on the inside like they might have in the past, right? So you're kind of feeling good about the coaching staff and what they think they have on that inside of the defense.
You really just need one more guy to step up. It's not like there's like one guy I know who's going to be the other three. It's more like, we know we got 3 guys. We just need one more.
We need one more. Agreed. And so I think you're feeling really good about the interior. Now you go to the edge unit. Again, it's fun to talk about the flash and the pass rush, but I want to get back to what made this Michigan defensive line so good in 2023 is the discipline. And you see a lot of pass rushers. I mean, Penn State's probably the best example, guys that really just fire and are kind of pass rush. That's not really how Michigan's defensive line was coached. I mean, they take on blocks, they keep that outside shoulder free, force everything inside. McGregor did a very good job. Harrell did a very good job. And Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore did too. And obviously you lose McGregor and Harrell to the NFL. Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart, that is, again, one of the better edge rushing duos that you'll see in the country. And I want to focus on a guy like Derek Moore first. I mean, again, a guy that flashed a little bit as a freshman, really made that jump into year 2, just like Kenny Grant and Mason Graham. Year 3, if he can take another step, again, you're looking at an All-American caliber edge rusher with a guy like Derek Moore.
And Derek Moore probably is more the prototypical Michigan guy, that bigger,
heavy hands.
Yeah, plays the run really well. I think what is unique about Derek Moore is he probably has a little bit more pass rush upside, probably a little more talented than the 2 guys who are leaving. But I do want to say, I don't think people should be forgetting about Josiah Stewart because, again, maybe he doesn't look like – I think people thought, he's going to come in and be the pass rusher. He made some monster plays in the run. Yes. Obviously, you go back to that Alabama game, on that final play of the game, he just forklifted J.C. Latham into the backfield, blew that play up, had another one where he got to Milroe on a play that I think Milroe might have scored, frankly. So, again, a guy who – and then you go to that Washington game, too, made a play there that, again, one of those plays that he had to make. It was one of the final guys. I think he made some monster plays. I think he's really athletic. And for his size, he does a good job getting his hands on guys and not kind of getting stuck. He doesn't get pushed around. I think he doesn't get maybe enough credit for like some of the plays he made in that last season.
I mean, it's a defensive line that had so many names to shout out. Yeah, a guy like Josiah Stewart might get lost in the wash. I'll say this: he was probably Michigan's best pure edge rusher in 2023 in terms of just pinning your ears back and getting after the passer. The laundry list of moves that he has to go in, kind of that tool bag, or I should say that pass rush bag. I mean, he's got a lot of different
and just a twitchier player than kind of the other guys.
Yeah, and Derek Moore, I like how they kind of similar to what we were talking about on the inside. Like, you love how they complement each other, right? Derek Moore is going to be more speed to power. I'm going to put my hands on you, and I'm going to put that tackle right into the quarterback's lap. And then a guy like Josiah Stewart can really test you with that burst and bend around tackles, test that speed, but also a guy that has power in his hands. And you saw that show up in the run game as well. Both of them had over 15% pass rush win rates. Both had 17 quarterback hurries. Those are your starting edge rushers. And I think that's no question about that. I think another question now is, just like on the inside, who are going to be the guys that you're rotating behind those guys? Would love to hear from the Michigan fans in the comment section. Dill, I'll ask you that question right now. Who you got for us?
No, who I'm super intrigued about is Kayshawn Bennett. And I know there was probably that play on the punt that maybe Michigan fans are still mad about. Maybe he was a little mad at the time about it. But he does have that, again, something that's been, I feel like, missing at times for Michigan, that great pass rush, that great twitchiness, that premier, like just that athleticism you need, the flexibility, all those things to be on the edge. I think I'm kind of going back to the spring game on this, frankly, but I did get the sense I was like, oh, I want to see more. And again, just really no room to play for Michigan's defensive line this year because they were so good. But he did flash some traits to me that were like, well, you've kept this guy in the program for a long time now. He's had a chance to develop. Kind of ready to turn him loose because I wouldn't mind seeing some strip sacks and some of those more exciting plays from that D-line. And that D-line was awesome. I think
the same conversation that you have with the offensive line goes to the defensive line again. You don't really know what the depth is because they didn't have a ton of chances to play because that Michigan offensive line has, 7 guys that you could put in the NFL draft last year. Kind of similar. There were 4 guys that were NFL caliber edge rushers. You lose 2 of them. You have 2 coming back. But outside of that, there wasn't a ton of opportunity for a guy like Kayshawn Bennett to play. But kind of following the track record of Michigan's development of guys on the defensive line, you kind of feel like Kayshawn Bennett's going to be right there in the mix. My personal guy, TJ Guy. I love that. Nice. TJ Guy, another guy that at 24% pass rush win rate, like a smaller sample size, 4 quarterback hurries. But again, a guy that flashed some stuff and some of that garbage time that is probably going to be a guy that Michigan leans on as a depth player in 2024. Dill, with all that being said, this Michigan defensive line, again, is going to be good. Opposing fans probably not happy about it. I'll ask you and I'll ask the Michigan listeners, who do you have leading this team in sacks in the 2024 year?
I got Mason Graham. I just think Mason Graham's the best defensive lineman in the country. I just think he's that good.
I'm going to go Josiah Stewart. Then again, I think from a pure pass rush, and this is me saying, yeah, Mason Graham's our best guy on the defensive line. Make no mistake about it. But as a pure pass rusher, like Josiah Stewart probably getting more opportunity, kind of was a part of that 4-man rotation last year. He's going to be on the field pretty much every substantial third and long. And he's a guy that when you ask him to pin his ears back, I think he has the goods to be a 10-plus sack kind of guy with more opportunity in 2024. That'll be my guy. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Again, appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas. We have a blast doing this. Cannot thank y'all enough for all the support you guys have shown. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.